The vote passed at 4:17station time, and in the margin of the official extinction order, in a script no one at the council table had written. Someone had pressed a single breath word into the document, said small, almost accidental, the kind of mark that looked like a smudge until you knew what smudges looked like in olfactory script. No one asked what it meant. 51 mandibles clicked in unison. 2 did not. The record would later show that the deliberation lasted 9 minutes and 42 seconds. The shortest species-level error sewer vote in the Galactic Compact's 400-year history. The motion cited 17 grounds. The first was military capacity. The 17th, and the one that received the most time, was linguistic contamination, humanity's method of communication. Its adaptive, absorbance, border-dissolving approach to language had been formally classified as a destabilizing force in 11 of the 14 border sectors where human populations had settled. The Compact's senior linguistic authority, Director HFY of the Breath Purification Bureau, had submitted a 40-page brief on the subject. The brief used the word contamination 63 times. It used the word irreversible 22 times. It did not use the word the margin contained. The extinction window was 72 hours. Standard procedure dictated that notification be transmitted to the condemned species designated diplomatic contact within the first 6 hours. Standard procedure also dictated a formal acknowledgement. No species had ever failed to send one. The acknowledgement was, by tradition, the last official communication. Humanity did not send an acknowledgement. Instead, at R4 of the window, a signal activated on 17 separate frequencies simultaneously. Military intelligence, and one channel that had not appeared in any compact registry for 60 years. A diplomatic deadband that predated the current communication protocols by 3 generations of technology. The signal was not a surrender. It was not a counter-threat. It was, according to the breath monitoring station that first detected it, a kind of noise organized, layered, and completely unclassifiable by existing linguistic taxonomy. Director HFY reviewed the intercept personally. His mandibles clicked once, then stopped. On a station 11 light minutes from the council chamber, James Hartley sat at a narrow desk that held to things a battered data terminal and a cracked tablet that had not been charged in 3 years. The crack ran from the upper left corner diagonally across the screen, splitting the display into 2 unequal halves. He did not look at the tablet. He opened the terminal, navigated to a file he had last updated the previous evening, and began to type. Entry Basaba Cordish hired th. Approximate translation. A longing for something lost that cannot be named precisely because the naming would require the thing to still exist. Status: no living first language speakers confirmed as of this record date. He saved the entry, closed the file. Then he opened it again and stared at entry Basati, which he had added the night before the vote. Dalmatian. Spera. Hope, specifically the kind carried without evidence of justification. Status: language extinct. Yoba Joba. Sir. Arya Chen stood in the doorway. She was 24 years old and had been assigned to his unit 8 months ago. And in those 8 months, James had watched her learn to stand differently in difficult rooms, straighter, with her weight distributed more evenly. The posture of someone practicing steadiness rather than possessing it. Right now in the doorway, she was not standing straight. The window is active, she said. I know. 17 frequencies. The deadband went live 12 minutes ago. I know. She crossed her arms, then uncrossed them. Then set her hands at her sides with the deliberateness of someone who had decided that stillness was a form of courage she could afford. They dismissed your research. The brief HFY called it primitive noise. 63 times in 40 pages, he used the word contamination, and not once did he. Arya? She stopped. I grieve for them, he said, before the first order went out. She did not ask who he meant. That was the thing about Arya. She heard the weight a sentence carried, not just its cargo. She stood in the doorway a moment longer, then nodded once, and left to do what she had been trained to do. James looked at the cracked tablet. He did not pick it up. You'll want to hear what happened in that room when the enemy asked why. Trust me, the answer was not what anyone expected. The 2-document doctrine had been founded 15 years earlier, in a converted storage bay on a station that no longer existed, by a woman named Priya Sharma and a man who had been James's mentor before he became James's commanding officer, before he became a casualty of the 3rd year of preparation. The doctrine's founding principle had been written on actual paper, in actual ink, in Priya's handwriting, which was precise and slightly too small for easy reading, as if she had always suspected that whatever she was writing might need to be hidden. We will build the weapon to end them. We will also build the word to save them. Priya was 32 now, and had been embedded in the Breath Communication Ministry for the past 7 years undercover as a linguistic analyst. She had a hobby that her Breath colleagues found baffling and faintly unsettling. She practiced calligraphy in dead languages, filling notebooks with scripts that no living population used. They did not understand why anyone would preserve a language that had stopped being spoken. For the Breath, a language that no longer served its population was simply gone. The concept of archiving a dead tongue held no utility in a culture whose entire civic architecture was built on linguistic continuity and purity. Priya's notebooks, stacked neatly on her desk in the ministry's secondary research wing, were, to her colleagues, evidence of a peculiar human malfunction. They did not confiscate them. They simply stopped asking about them. What the notebooks actually contained, in the margins of the calligraphy practice, written in a cipher that used extinct vocabulary as its key, the complete military and civilian infrastructure mapping of the Breath home system. Every facility, every frequency, every relay node. Priya had spent 7 years filling those margins. She had also found something she had not been looking for. The Breath language, in its current legislative form, contained 47 distinct words for erasure, 47 gradations of removal, deletion, suppression, and elimination, each carrying specific legal and social weight. The language had been formally audited and standardized by the Purification Bureau every 12 years for the past 3 centuries. Director HFY had overseen the last 4 audits personally. What the audits had removed, systematically and without annotation, in the public record 12 words. Priya had found them in pre-audit linguistic archives that the Bureau had not considered worth deleting because no one outside specialized academic circles would ever think to look. The 12 words were old. Some were archaic enough that their pronunciation had to be reconstructed from phonetic notation. But they were Breath. Unmistakably, provably, documentably Breath. Every one of them meant some form of peace. The current Breath lexicon contains 0 words for mercy. This was what Priya had written to James in her last field report, transmitted through a channel so narrow it took 11 hours to arrive. They did not always speak this way. Someone decided they should. Across the Breath's civilian population, embedded for the past 10 years among the ordinary administrative workers and transit operators and municipal record keepers of 4 separate settlement districts, Omar Sirn had been documenting something Priya's infrastructure maps could not capture. Omar was 30 years old and had grown up in Cairo and had a particular gift for what his instructors had called inhabiting the room, the ability to be present in a space without registering as a point of interest. He had spent a decade being genuinely unremarkable in Breath civilian life, which was, given that he was a human in a Breath settlement district, a more substantial achievement than it sounds. What Omar had documented, in careful and methodical field notes that arrived in fragments through rotating dead drop protocols, the Breath civilian population was afraid. Not of humans specifically, though the official communications had ensured that fear was present too. They were afraid of their own linguistic purity laws. The audit cycles, the Bureau's monitoring of informal communication, the standing policy that any unofficial use of unapproved vocabulary was a reclassifiable offense. Omar had watched people hesitate before speaking, had watched a settlement administrator choose a longer, more technically correct phrase over a shorter, instinctively gentler one, then glance sideways before finishing the sentence. Had watched a child ask a question in a word that wasn't on the approved list, and watched the child's parent answer it while steering them toward the approved synonym quickly, without making it into a correction. They are not monsters, Omar had written, in the plainest language he ever used in a field report. They are afraid. The third operative had no recent field reports. Zoe Martinez, 37, Mexico City, had been embedded among Breath diplomatic communications staff for 15 years, longer than anyone else in the doctrine's operational history. She had been caught 8 years ago. The doctrine's emergency protocol had activated. The channel went dark, her cover identity was sealed, her operational file was moved to a status designation that James had never used before and had not used since. The designation had a formal name in the doctrine's procedural documentation. The informal name was simply missing. The only thing recovered from Zoe's last active channel before it went dark was its 10-second audio file. Arya had told James about it quietly. The day it arrived, in the same tone one used to report something factual that happened to be devastating. It's her voice. She's singing. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. Old English pronunciation. James had not asked why Zoe had sent lullabies her last transmission. He understood why. The question he had not answered, in 8 years of not answering it, was whether she had sent it for them or for herself. Whether it was a signal I am still here, I am still thinking like a human. I have not lost the thread, whether it was simply what a person sang when they needed something that felt like home and were very far from it. The cracked tablet on his desk held that file. It had held it for 8 years. He had not charged the tablet in 3 years, which meant the file existed in the tablet's non-volatile memory and could only be accessed if he found a coupled charging cable, which he had not looked for. 40 minutes after the 17-frequency signal activated, a response arrived on the diplomatic deadband from a source outside the official compact communication registry. The signal used a pidgin code so old that James had needed 3 months of archival research to reconstruct the decryption key, a code built from the fragments of a contact protocol used between species that had been extinct for over centuries. It was, as best as James could determine, the most private channel in the compact's history of frequency that appeared in no current database because it predated every current database. Used by no one because no one alive had known it still existed. Someone alive had known. The message, decoded, was 8 words in compressed pidgin notation. You are not the first they have done this to. The sender's identifier, embedded in the signal's carrier wave in a format so old it took James's decryption system for minutes to parse, resolved to a breath diplomatic registry number. The tenure attached to that number 70 for years. Myrathi, James said, reading the name from his screen. He sent one word back. The pidgin code had limited vocabulary, which meant precision was not always possible, but in this case the word he needed was in the codebook. Yes. Myrathi's response took 6 minutes. Like delay plus composition time, James estimated. When it arrived, it was longer than 8 words, and the decryption system flagged to terms it could not fully resolve from the archaic codebook. James filled in the gaps from context. You are the first species I have seen prepare for war and prepare for what comes after. I have watched your people's communications for 11 years. I have read your linguist brief. They called it primitive noise. I have a question about your word for mercy. There's no such word. I am asking whether you knew this before you began. James read the message twice. Then he opened his translation protocols and composed a response that took him 12 minutes to write, which was by a significant margin the longest time he had ever spent on 8 words of pidgin. We knew. That is why we looked. In the breath diplomatic registry, Myrathi's personal log recorded the following entry at the timestamp corresponding to the receipt of James's response. I have been a diplomat for 70 years. In that time I have developed what I believe to be a reliable method for assessing the behavioral state of a negotiating party under extreme duress. The method involves observing what repetitive tasks the party performs when they believe they are not being observed. The human designated as primary contact Hartley, James' extensional linguistic specialty was observed via standard monitoring to be updating a personal data archive in the hours immediately following the extinction vote. The archive appears to be a catalog of extinct languages. In breath behavioral science, this pattern, the performance of repetitive archival tasks in the face of imminent erasure, is classified as a dissociative response. The subject has, in this interpretation, begun the process of memorializing what will be lost. He does not believe his species will survive. I find this assessment consistent with the monitoring data. I noted for the record, they did not believe he would survive. That was what Myrathi had concluded at Sudhir station time. Watching James Hartley add entry basba to a dictionary of dying languages on the night his species had been given 72 hours to exist. Myrathi was wrong, but the error was, in its way, a reasonable one. Because what Myrathi was watching, what the monitoring systems had captured, what the behavioral assessment had classified, what the 70-year diplomatic career had processed and filed, looked from the outside exactly like a man making peace with an ending. The careful entry, the saved file, the opened file again, the number basaba, added to a sequence that had been building for 15 years. The cracked tablet on the desk that he never charged and never put away. What it actually was, Myrathi would not understand for another 41 hours. The deadband carried one more message from Myrathi before the operational phase began. They arrived at R18 of the extinction window, and it was not a question. It was structured, in the pidgin's compressed syntax, as a statement of record. The choice you will face is not whether to survive. Your survival, I now believe, is resolved. The choice is what you do with the moment after. I have watched many species reach that moment. Most do not know they are making a choice at all. They believe they are simply responding. I am noting this because I believe you are different, and because in 74 years I have learned that believing a thing and knowing it are not the same, and that I am sometimes wrong. James rated 3 times. Then he closed the terminal, stood up from the narrow desk, and looked at the cracked tablet for a long moment. He did not pick it up. He went to find Arya. The war lasted 31 minutes. That number would appear later in the Mercy Charter Council's formal historical record, cited without elaboration in the third paragraph of the preamble's contextual notes. 31 minutes. The Breath Fleet, 412 vessels, the largest single military deployment in compact history since the Sivari border campaigns, had been rendered operationally inert in 31 minutes by a targeting system that had taken 11 years to build, 3 years to test, and 4 minutes and 9 seconds to deploy. The system did not destroy the fleet. It disabled it. Every propulsion array, every communication node across 412 ships went dark in a cascade sequence that the Breath Tactical Command would later describe, in their own after-action report, as a silence that spread like a word. James had not given the order. The order had been standing for 6 years, Preherschates. Pre-darted into the deployment system on a timer that would activate automatically if no countermand was received within the first 20 minutes of the extinction window's final phase. James had built it that way deliberately, so that the choice was not whether to deploy the system but whether to stop it. He had spent 11 years making the weapon. He had spent the last 6 deciding that the harder thing to build was the architecture of a choice you had already made before the moment arrived. At minute 17, Arya had come to the doorway of the operational center. "Countermand window closes in 3 minutes, she said. James was looking at his terminal. On the screen, the deployment timer. Beside it, open in a second window, a document he had not shown anyone outside the Doctrine's senior circle. A linguistic archive recovered from Breath pre-audit records, compiled by Priya Sharma over 7 years of calligraphy practice and margin notation, containing 12 words that the Breath Purification Bureau had removed from the official lexicon across 3 centuries of systematic audit. 12 words, all of them, in various archaic forms, meaning something in the direction of peace. "Sir, I know." She watched him. He did not move. At minute 20, the countermand window closed. The cascade ran for 11 more minutes. Then it was done, and 412 ships hung silent in the dark between star systems. And the extinction window had 49 hours and 29 minutes remaining, and James Hartley closed the linguistic archive, opened his dictionary, and added nothing. He just looked at the last entry. Number Basaba. Cornish higher th. Longing for something lost that cannot be named precisely because the naming would require the thing to still exist. He closed the terminal. He set his dictionary on the table. Then he picked up his cracked tablet. The first time he had touched it in 3 years, found a charging cable in the desk's second drawer and plugged it in. The diplomatic channel to the Breathcom and vessel opened 40 minutes after the cascade. The request had come from the Breath side. This was, the Council's monitoring team noted, without precedent. In the entire recorded history of compact military engagements, no disabled fleet had ever initiated diplomatic contact, or been destroyed, or waited in silence for terms they had not asked. Director's Ever X's voice came through the channel without the neutralizing breath that Breath formal protocol required before official statements. The breath, a specific exhalation that reset the speaker's olfactory register, marking the transition from informal to official communication, had been present at the vote. Present at every Bureau audit address, present at every formal occasion James had reviewed in X's public record. 31 minutes of silence in a disabled fleet had, apparently, made the protocol feel beside the point. "You had the weapon," X said. His voice carried the particular flatness of someone who had built an entire framework for understanding the world and was currently watching it fail to parse the available data. "You had the justification. The vote was valid. The window is active. You chose not to complete it." A pause. Not a Breath formal pause. Those had specific durations encoded in protocol. This was something else. Why? It was not structured as a question. It was structured as a classification request, a Breath speaker demanding that an event be assigned to a category so that it could be processed. But the word it used in Breath formal register was the word for a question that the speaker does not have a precising category for. Technically, the closest the current Breath lexicon had to expressing genuine not knowing. James set his dictionary face down on the desk in front of him. That was all. A man setting a book down. Then he opened the Mercy engine. The Mercy engine was not a weapon system. It had been built in the same facility as the Cascade targeting array, by the same team in the same 11 years, and it had never appeared in any document that used the word weapon because it was not one. It was a translation architecture, a linguistic recovery and delivery system designed to present in real time. The 12 archaic breath peace words that the Purification Bureau had excised from the lexicon, rendered in their original phonetic notation. With full etymological tracing to their pre-audit source documents, every word sorts, every audit that had removed it dated uncited, every bureau directive that had classified it as linguistic contamination listed by number, with ZFY's signature on 4 of the last 6. James opened the dictionary. He turned it to a page near the back, where the entries were not Cornish or any human language at all, but 12 lines of reconstructed breath script, phonetically annotated in a system Priya had developed over 3 years of archival work. He held it up to the channel's visual feed. "Because your language remembered," he said. Across 412 silent ships, Director's HFY's mandibles stopped clicking. The Council's monitoring record noted this at timestamp .6 It noted the duration of the stillness. 9 seconds, and the fact that when ZFY spoke again, he used a word that did not appear in the current breath official lexicon. He used it correctly. His pronunciation was precise. The word was old enough that its phonetic pattern had shifted slightly from the reconstructed version in Priya's archive, which meant ZFY had not learned it from the archive at some other time, and had not used it, and the Mercy engine had returned it to him like a thing he had not known he was missing until he heard it again. The word was 3V, the act of choosing not to destroy something you have the power to destroy. In the Breath Administrative District of the 3rd Settlement, a municipal record keeper named Vishari, 41 years old, had spent the previous 20 hours writing a letter. 7 lines. The one she used for formal documents that needed to be preserved. She had sealed it and addressed it to her family, and had not sent it, because the transmission relay was being monitored and she did not know what sending it would mean for them. She had sat with it on her desk instead. Next to her terminal, which showed the official compact emergency broadcast on silent, the scrolling text of the extinction window's countdown. Error 22 of the window. The broadcast changed. It did not announce a victory. The compact's emergency system did not have a category for what had happened, so what appeared on the terminal was a data packet, transmitted from the Human Diplomatic Channel, addressed to 12,000 civilian facilities across the Breath settlement districts, each packet containing a single file. When Vishari opened it, was a dictionary entry. The entry was in Breath. The script was archaic but readable. The phonetic notation beside it was in a hand she did not recognize, small, precise, slightly too small for easy reading. At the bottom of the entry, a note in the same hand: "This word was yours before the audits. We thought you should have it back." The word was 3VAK. Vishari read the definition 3 times. Then she picked up the sealed letter from her desk, held it for a moment and set it in the recycling tray without opening it. She did not send it and she did not keep it. She had written it in a language that, as of 22 hours ago, had no word for the thing that had just happened. As of 4 minutes ago, it did. She had thought the word was mythological, something from before the audits, from the stories her grandmother had told in the old register before the monitoring laws made the old register a classifiable risk. A word for something she had not believed was real. In my Rathi's diplomatic log at the timestamp corresponding to the Mercy engine's activation and ZFY's response, the following entry was recorded: "I have been a diplomat for 74 years. I have never been more wrong about anything. I assessed the human designated Hartleys to society performing memorial archival tasks in anticipation of extinction. What he was performing was, in fact, preparation. The dictionary was not a memorial. It contained what I now see was the operational core of their entire doctrine. I note, for the record, that the distinction between a man cataloging what will be lost and a man cataloging what will be needed is not visible from the outside. I also note that I do not know of a word in any language I speak for the specific experience of being wrong in a way that produces something like relief. I will look." The Mercy Charter Council was formed 14 days after the extinction window closed. Its founding document was code-signed. This was not a concession or a diplomatic formality, but a structural requirement that James had built into the doctrine's post-conflict protocols 11 years earlier, before the first operative was ever deployed. Equal representation from the first session. The preamble would include the dead from both sides. These were not negotiable terms offered to a defeated party. They were conditions James had set for humanity's own participation, because the doctrine's founding principle had always been to documents, and the second one was only worth writing if the other side could see their name in it. The preamble listed 22 names, 11 human, 11 breath, At the signing ceremony, which was held in a chamber selected because it was large enough to accommodate representatives from all for species present breath, HFY, Quolari, and Sothori, the HFY delegates' crystalline vocal chambers hummed faintly throughout the name reading. Stayed, which had been flattened since the beginning of the session, splayed wide when HFY performed the neutralizing breath before signing. It was the third time he had made that exhalation in James's presence, once at the council vote, once when he asked why, and now here, marking the formal transition from what the war had been to what the record would say it became. The Sothori witnesses' bioluminescent unstendrils cycled from amber to blue during the name reading. They did not cycle back. Before the signing, James connected the cracked tablet to the chamber's audio system. The tablet had been charging for 14 days. The file it held was 2 seconds long. He pressed play. Human. Female. Twinkle. Twinkle. Little star. Old English pronunciation, slightly archaic, the vowels rounder than modern usage. 7 seconds. Then silence. Several of the breath delegates went still in the way that breath went still when their olfactory language registers received something it could not classify, not the stillness of threat assessment, but the deeper stillness of a system encountering a signal outside its taxonomy. They did not know what the sound was. They went still anyway. The council record noted this without explanation. James did not explain it. The record did not need to say what the sound meant. It needed only to say that it was there at the beginning, before the signatures, before the charter's first article was read aloud, before HFY used the word 3VAK in an official document for the first time in the Bureau's recorded history. The record said an audio file was played. Duration 2 seconds. Source: Personal Archive of James Hartley. Provenance: recovered from Operative Zoe Martinez. Status of operative missing. 5 years later, at Lodya station time, James Hartley opened his dictionary. The entry he added was number 29. The script was not Cornish. It was not Dalmatian, not Old English. Not any of the 899 languages of human origin that had come before it. The phonetic notation beside it was Priya's. He recognized the handwriting, the letters slightly too small, the precision that came from years of filling margins with things that needed to be preserved. She had sent him the reconstructed pronunciation 3 years ago, after the Council's first linguistic exchange program had produced its initial archive. He had been waiting to add it until he had heard it spoken aloud by a breath-first language speaker and confirmed that the reconstruction was accurate. He had heard it 6 months ago. He had been waiting since then for no reason he could have explained, except that Lodian was when he always did this. And waiting until Lodian had come to feel like the only part of the ritual that still belonged entirely to him. The word was 3VAK. He saved the entry. Closed the file. Sat for a moment at the narrow desk. Across the room, in a glass case that had been installed the previous year, the cracked tablet sat in its housing. The crack ran from the upper left corner diagonally across the screen, unchanged. The dictionary, an earlier physical edition, the one he had held up to the diplomatic channel feed, the one with Priya's 12 entries near the back, lay open to page 29. Under the case, a small label on brushed metal. Zoe Martinez. Operative, linguist, status missing. No dates. James closed the dictionary. Stood, walked to the window which looked out onto the council chamber's central atrium, where, at this hour, the morning session's delegates were beginning to arrive, breath and human and HFY and Quolari, moving through the same space. Their various ways of occupying a room layered over each other in a pattern that, 5 years in, no longer required active management. Simply, what the atrium looked like in the morning. The tablet in its case held 7 seconds of a voice that was not here. The dictionary lay open to a word in a language that 8 years ago had no word for what had happened. Outside, the morning session began.